Growing old doesn't just shrink our skin, it magnifies our relationships. Aging is not just a biological process. It's an emotional transformation. You start to see who really adds peace to your life and who simply adds pressure. And by the time you're finally wise enough to set boundaries, you're also weary enough to not want to explain them. Today, I want to talk about 5 types of people you must courageously walk away from in old age. Not because you don't love them, but because you finally love yourself enough to stop shrinking for their comfort. If you're approaching or already in that season of life where peace means more than being liked, this might be the most important conversation you hear all year. You know this person. Maybe it's a sibling, an old friend, or even a grown child. They have a way of twisting the past and turning it into a ledger where every good deed they've ever done for you becomes a debt you're expected to repay forever. They say things like, "After everything I did for you, this is how you treat me?" Or, "Wow, I guess you're too busy now that you have your own life." And suddenly what should have been a simple boundary or a moment of self-care becomes an emotional negotiation. You find yourself explaining, apologizing, justifying, and afterward you feel tired, heavier, smaller. Guilt trippers are rarely loud. They're not always cruel. In fact, they often come across as caring, just deeply disappointed. That disappointment isn't always spoken directly, but you feel it in the tone, in the pauses, in the long silences that follow when you say no. Here's what makes it so hard. Guilt trippers often come disguised as the people you love the most. They've been in your life for decades. They know your patterns, your insecurities, your tender spots. And instead of respecting them, they manipulate them. Not always maliciously, but manipulation doesn't require malice. Sometimes it just requires entitlement. These are people who believe they deserve access to you on demand. And when they don't get it, they respond with withdrawal, judgment, or passive resentment. It becomes a loop. You pull back to protect yourself. They guilt you for pulling back, and you end up returning to prove you're still loyal. Not because it feels good, but because it feels familiar, and that's the trap. As we get older, we confuse guilt with obligation. We think, well, I owe them this much after all they've done. But love isn't something to be repaid. It's something to be shared freely, generously, without keeping score. The problem with guilt is that it masquerades as virtue. It makes you feel responsible when, in truth, you're just responding to someone else's inability to manage their expectations. And if you're not careful, guilt will have you breaking your own heart to keep someone else from feeling uncomfortable. But what you must understand, especially as you age, is that guilt is not a compass. It doesn't point you toward love. It points you toward self-abandonment. In your later years, energy becomes precious. Time becomes sacred. And any relationship that consistently leaves you feeling indebted rather than uplifted is one that quietly chips away at your spirit. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. You are not selfish for choosing peace. You are not ungrateful for saying, "That doesn't work for me anymore." You are finally wise enough to understand that relationships should be mutual, not manipulative. And the older you get, the less you owe anyone except yourself. You've probably met this person, and if you're honest, you may have kept them in your life far longer than they deserved because they came wrapped in familiarity. They might even wear the mask of love or concern, but beneath that surface is something colder, dismissal, sarcasm, or subtle ridicule aimed directly at your joy. You tell them you've started writing poetry again, and they laugh, "At your age? That's cute." You mention wanting to travel solo, and they respond with a smirk, "That's a bit ambitious, don't you think?" Every time you speak a dream aloud, no matter how small or simple, they're quick to downplay it, question it, or make it sound like a foolish fantasy. Their tone may be light, even teasing, but you feel it. That little stab, that quiet voice they awaken in you that whispers, "Maybe I am being ridiculous." And it's not just about big dreams. Sometimes it's the small sparks, the kindling of joy you try to reclaim as you age, picking up a paintbrush, taking dance lessons, learning to play the guitar, or simply redecorating your space in a way that feels like you again. To you, these are sacred gestures, acts of reclaiming your voice, your time, your life. To them, it's material for mockery. What's painful is that these people often carry their own abandoned dreams. They haven't made peace with their own unlived potential, so when you dare to live yours, especially later in life, it threatens them. Your joy reminds them of their resignation. Your courage exposes their comfort zone. And rather than examine their own choices, it's easier to shame yours. And because you value their opinion, their words sink deeper. You find yourself second-guessing something that once lit you up. You shrink a little, speak softer, share less. Before long, you're censoring your enthusiasm because you're afraid of being seen as naive, too old, or trying too hard. But here's the truth. Aging doesn't mean dimming your light. It means turning it toward the things you finally have time to love. And anyone who treats your joy like a joke is showing you their fear, not your failure. You're allowed to be excited. You're allowed to try new things. You're allowed to start over or start late or start messy. There is no expiration date on wonder, no age limit on becoming, and no space in your life, especially now, for anyone who demands that you abandon your joy just to make them feel more comfortable in their resignation. If someone's first instinct is to scoff when you share something beautiful with them, pay attention. That is not humor. That is control dressed up as cynicism. And if they can't clap for your courage, they don't deserve a seat beside it. Dreaming in old age is not a sign of immaturity. It's a sign of resilience, of hope, of being deeply, defiantly alive. You probably know this person without even needing to think very hard, the one whose presence feels like walking into a room with the windows shut tight and the air stale. They don't start conversations, they start sighs. Everything is always wrong. Nothing is ever enough. And no matter how many solutions you offer or how much compassion you pour out, their situation never changes because they don't want solutions. They want an audience. The chronic complainer isn't someone going through a rough patch. This isn't grief or stress or the heaviness of a season. This is a pattern, a personality that has grown addicted to victimhood and learned to bond through misery. You bring up the sunshine, they remind you of the rain. You mention something good in your life, they twist it into something negative in theirs. And what makes it so exhausting is that you keep hoping your encouragement will lift them, but it never does. They don't want light. They want to keep pulling you into their shadow. And here's the hardest part. When you're aging, your emotional energy is not what it used to be. You're no longer in the season where you can afford to be everything for everyone. That might sound harsh, but it's honest. Every conversation costs you something. Every interaction either restores your spirit or drains it. And spending your limited energy constantly trying to hold space for someone who refuses to heal is like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in it. You may have tried to reason with them. Maybe you've said things like, "Have you thought about talking to someone about this?" Or, "Not everything is as bad as it seems." But those words go nowhere. They dodge responsibility like it's poison. They don't want perspective. They want permission to keep spiraling. And more than that, they want company. Because misery loves company, but it doesn't love growth. Misery loves sameness. It thrives in cycles and loops and familiar complaints that never move forward. And if you're not careful, you'll find yourself adjusting your mood just to match theirs. You'll catch yourself censoring your good news so you don't trigger their next wave of bitterness. You'll leave phone calls feeling inexplicably heavy, and you won't know why, until you realize you've been emotionally hosting a person who doesn't even try to carry their own weight. That is not compassion. That is codependency disguised as kindness. You can love people from a distance. You can care deeply without being constantly available for someone else's drama. You are allowed to say, "I care about you, but I can't be your emotional landfill." You're allowed to choose conversations that feel alive, not ones that feel like an obligation to emotionally babysit someone who refuses to take ownership of their experience. The truth is, in this chapter of your life, peace matters more than politeness. It's not about being cold. It's about being clear. You get to choose joy. You get to protect your energy. And you get to step back from people who only know how to relate to the world through what's broken, especially when they make no effort to fix it. You might not even notice this person at first. They're not loud. They don't stir up conflict. In fact, they're often very polite. They remember your birthday, show up for the holidays, and send you the occasional thinking of you text. But when life truly shakes you, when you're hurting, confused, or just in need of something deeper, they vanish into the background like furniture, present but not participating, physically there, emotionally absent. And at first, you might excuse it. You tell yourself they're just busy, that not everyone knows how to show up in a crisis, or that maybe you're expecting too much. But eventually, you realize something unsettling. This person isn't just unavailable in the hard times. They're unavailable all the time. There's a hollowness to the relationship. Conversations stay on the surface. Their responses are short, non-committal, generic. You share something vulnerable and they nod, change the subject, or offer a bland, "that's tough," and move on. It's like pouring your heart into a void. This kind of absence is uniquely painful. Because they're still around, you can't quite explain what's missing. It's not what they do, it's what they don't do. They don't ask questions that matter. They don't follow up on the things you care about. They don't celebrate your wins with genuine excitement or hold you in your losses with real presence. They stay close enough to be counted as there, but far enough to avoid any real emotional investment. And as you get older, that emotional absence becomes harder to ignore, because with age comes clarity. You begin to notice the difference between people who simply witness your life and those who actually walk through it with you. You start realizing how lonely it feels to sit next to someone and still feel completely alone. The passive puppet isn't malicious. They don't mean to hurt you, but that's what makes it harder. There's no argument to point to, no betrayal to name. Just the slow, quiet erosion of connection. And when you finally pull back or stop reaching out, they often act confused. They'll say, "But I've always been here." And technically, that's true. But presence isn't proximity. Being around is not the same as being engaged, supportive, or emotionally available. In your later years, what you crave more than anything is authenticity, depth, people who see you clearly and respond with intention, not obligation. You want real conversations, reciprocal warmth, companionship that doesn't just take up space but brings life to it. You are not asking for too much. You are asking for enough connection to feel safe, enough response to feel seen, enough care to feel like you matter. So when someone stays in your life but never actually steps into it, when their silence speaks louder than their words and their detachment wears the mask of politeness, pay attention. Because emotional absence over time becomes a form of abandonment. Not in the dramatic movie scene way, but in the subtle, soul-wearying way that teaches you not to expect too much from people. That convinces you to keep things to yourself. That makes you quieter, even in your own life story. And no one deserves to feel invisible in a relationship they've spent years showing up for. This person is tricky to spot because they often come disguised as your biggest supporter. They compliment you, celebrate your milestones, and check in just enough to seem genuine. But underneath the surface, there's a quiet tension, a subtle competition, a strange undertone to your relationship that always makes you feel slightly smaller. You share a success, maybe you finished a creative project, reconnected with someone you love, or simply had a week where you felt at peace. And before you can finish your sentence, they're already telling you about their own accomplishment. Not in a way that builds connection, but in a way that shifts the spotlight. You notice how their tone changes when you talk about something going well. Their smile doesn't quite reach their eyes. Their praise comes with a but. That's great, but it's not really a big deal, right? Or worse, they cloak their envy in concern. Are you sure that's really a smart thing to be focusing on right now? At first, you doubt yourself. You wonder if you're being sensitive. You tell yourself, maybe I'm just reading into it. Maybe they're just trying to relate. But over time, the pattern becomes clear. Every time you rise, they shift. They minimize, redirect, or quietly compete. They don't celebrate your growth. They measure themselves against it. And it's not always about achievement. Sometimes it's about attention, relevance, or control. They want to be the one who gives advice, not the one who needs it. They want to be the strong one, the wise one, the one with the more impressive story. Your evolution threatens their identity because it forces them to confront the ways they haven't grown. And instead of doing the inner work, they try to pull you back to a version of yourself that made them feel more secure. This kind of rivalry is dangerous, not because it's loud, but because it's quiet. It doesn't come in obvious jealousy. It comes in friendly competition, subtle shade, or emotional withdrawal when you're doing well. And when you start shrinking your joy, filtering your wins, or downplaying your progress just to keep the peace, that's when you know this person is not a supporter, they're a rival. What makes it even harder is the history. You may have shared years, maybe even decades of friendship. You may love them deeply, but love without safety becomes confusion. When someone you care about consistently competes with you instead of connecting with you, it chips away at your self-trust. You start to believe that being proud of yourself is somehow rude, that wanting to grow is selfish, that taking up space is a threat to someone else's comfort. But here's the truth. Real friends don't keep score. Real friends don't get smaller when you shine. They glow beside you. As you age, competition should be the last thing you feel in your relationships. This season of life isn't about proving, it's about being. It's about deepening, softening, learning how to be proud of yourself without apology, and surrounded by people who are proud of you too. The friend who's always competing will never let you rest in your joy. You'll always feel like you have to explain it, defend it, or hide it. And that's no way to live. Not when you've finally earned the right to be fully and freely who you are. You've spent a lifetime becoming. You do not have to dilute yourself for someone who only knows how to love you when you're behind them. Let me say something hard and true. Some people you love will not grow with you. Some will not even clap for you. And that's okay. Aging with grace isn't about how few wrinkles you have. It's about how few regrets you carry. Choose people who make you feel lighter, safer, and seen. The older you get, the more sacred your circle becomes. Guard it with everything you've got.